Have you ever walked away from an argument feeling defeated, knowing you were right but unable to prove it? Have you watched someone twist your words, manipulate the conversation, and leave you speechless? What if I told you that the most powerful people in the world, CEOs, politicians, master negotiators, they don't win arguments by shouting louder or being more aggressive. They win because they've mastered the exact same techniques that lawyers use in the courtroom every single day. You don't need a law degree to argue like a lawyer. You just need the right framework. In the next hour, you're going to learn the battle-tested strategies that trial attorneys spend years mastering. Strategies you can use tomorrow morning in your next meeting, your next negotiation, or even your next family debate. This isn't about being argumentative. This is about being effective. This is about commanding respect, controlling conversations, and getting what you deserve. If you're ready to never lose an argument again, and I mean never, then keep listening. By the end of this audiobook, you'll have a mental toolkit that most people will never possess. And before we dive in, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. This channel, Mindset Audiobooks, is dedicated to giving you the psychological edge in every area of your life. Don't just listen, commit to transformation. Subscribe now and let's begin. Welcome to How to Argue Like a Lawyer Without Going to Court, brought to you by Mindset Audiobooks, where we don't just give you information, we give you power. Here's the truth. Every conversation you have is a negotiation. Every disagreement is a courtroom. And right now, you're either winning or losing. There's no middle ground. The good news? The skills that make lawyers successful in court are the exact same skills that will make you successful in life. This audiobook is divided into 10 powerful chapters. Each one builds on the last, creating a complete system for persuasive communication. You'll learn how to structure your arguments like opening statements, how to cross-examine without aggression, how to handle objections with surgical precision, and how to close every conversation with impact. We'll cover everything from controlling your emotions under pressure to using the power of silence as a weapon. You'll discover how to read people like depositions, expose flawed logic with the Socratic Method, and reframe any conversation to your advantage. As Clarence Darrow, one of America's greatest trial lawyers, once said, "The only real lawyers are trial lawyers, and trial lawyers try cases to juries." But you? You're going to take these trial-tested techniques and apply them to the courtroom of everyday life. This isn't a theory. This is a practical, step-by-step system. So get comfortable, stay focused, and prepare to upgrade the way you communicate forever. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The Opening Statement. How to frame any argument before it even starts. In a courtroom, the opening statement is everything. Before a single witness takes the stand, before any evidence is presented, the lawyer stands before the jury and tells them a story. Not the story, their story. The version of reality they want the jury to believe. And here's the thing, by the time that opening statement is done, most cases are already won or lost. Why? Because human beings don't process information objectively. We process it through frames. Whoever controls the frame controls the outcome. Think about the last argument you had. Maybe it was with your boss about a missed deadline. Maybe it was with your spouse about household responsibilities. Maybe it was with a customer service rep who refused to give you a refund. Whoever defined the problem first, whoever set the terms of the debate, whoever framed the conversation, that person won. This is what lawyers understand that most people don't. The battle isn't won in the middle of the argument. It's won in the setup. Let me give you an example. Imagine two lawyers in a car accident case. Same facts, same evidence. Lawyer A stands up and says, "This is a case about a reckless driver who was texting and caused a collision." Lawyer B stands up and says, "This is a case about a hard-working father who glanced at his phone for 1 second to check on his sick daughter and was involved in an unavoidable accident." Same event, totally different frames. And whichever frame the jury accepts will determine the verdict. Now, let's bring this into your life. You walk into your boss's office to ask for a raise. If you frame the conversation as, "I need more money because my rent went up," you've already lost. That's your problem, not your boss's. But if you frame it as, "I've increased revenue by 23% this quarter and taken on responsibilities beyond my job description," I'd like to discuss compensation that reflects my contribution. You've just reframed the entire conversation. Now it's not about what you need. It's about what you've earned. See the difference? The opening statement in any argument is your chance to set the narrative. It's your opportunity to define reality before the other person does. And just like in a courtroom, once that frame is set, it's incredibly difficult to change. So how do you craft a powerful opening statement in everyday life? First, start with the outcome you want. Lawyers never walk into court without knowing what verdict they're seeking. You shouldn't walk into any important conversation without knowing what result you want. Be specific. I want my boss to agree to a 15% raise. I want my partner to agree to split the chores differently. I want this company to refund my money and apologize. Know your goal before you open your mouth. Second, identify the core issue and make it your version of the core issue. Let's say you're in a meeting and a colleague publicly blames you for a project delay. The instinct is to get defensive. That's not true. I did my part, but that's reacting to their frame. Instead, you reframe. I think the real issue here is that we didn't have clear communication about timelines from the start. Let's talk about how we can fix that moving forward. Now you've shifted the focus from blame to solutions, from you as the problem to the system as the problem. Third, use the power of the because. Psychological research shows that people are far more likely to agree with you if you give them a reason, even if the reason isn't particularly strong. Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer conducted a famous study where people trying to cut in line at a copy machine had much higher success rates when they used the word because, even when the reason was trivial. In your opening statement, always include a because. Not, I think we should move the deadline, but I think we should move the deadline because it'll give us time to deliver higher quality work and avoid costly mistakes. Fourth, be concise and confident. Lawyers know that juries have short attention spans. So do your colleagues, your clients, your family members. Your opening statement isn't a speech, it's a precision strike. Get in, frame the issue, state your position, and stop talking. Confidence comes from brevity. Rambling signals uncertainty. Here's a formula. State the situation plus define the problem plus present your position plus give the reason. Example. We're 3 weeks from launch. The current timeline doesn't account for user testing. I believe we should push the launch by 2 weeks because it'll prevent a buggy release that could damage our reputation. 20 seconds. Clear, confident, framed. Now, here's where most people screw this up. They think framing is manipulation. It's not. It's clarity. You're not lying. You're not hiding facts. You're simply presenting the situation in a way that highlights what you believe is most important. The other side will do the same. That's how arguments work. That's how persuasion works. As the great trial lawyer Jerry Spence once said, "The enemy of persuasion is the assumption that others see the world as we do." Your job isn't to assume people will automatically understand your perspective. Your job is to frame it so compellingly that they can't help but see it. Let me leave you with this thought. Every single day, you're entering courtrooms, conference rooms, living rooms, phone calls, text exchanges. Every conversation is an opening statement waiting to be delivered. The question is, will you control the frame, or will someone else? In the next chapter, we're going to talk about how to build your case with evidence and logic, just like a lawyer presenting to a jury. But none of that matters if you don't nail the opening. Because in arguments, just like in trials, first impressions aren't just important, they're everything. Master the opening statement, and you've already won half the battle. Chapter 2. Building your case. The art of evidence-based persuasion. You've set the frame. You've delivered your opening statement. The other person is listening. Now comes the moment where most people lose. They fail to back up their position with anything concrete. Here's what separates lawyers from everyone else. Lawyers don't just claim things. They prove things. They understand that in any argument, your opinion means nothing without evidence. Your feelings don't matter. Your assumptions don't count. What matters is what you can demonstrate. Think about the last time someone tried to convince you of something without proof. Maybe a salesperson told you a product was the best on the market without showing you why. Maybe a coworker claimed they deserved credit for a project without pointing to specific contributions. How did that feel? Hollow, right? Unconvincing. Now think about a time someone presented you with clear facts, specific examples, and logical reasoning. Even if you didn't want to agree, you probably found yourself nodding along. That's the power of evidence-based persuasion. In a courtroom, lawyers know they're working with three types of evidence: documentary evidence, contracts, emails, records, testimonial evidence, witness statements, and physical evidence, objects, photos, tangible proof. In your everyday arguments, you have access to all three. You just need to know how to use them. Documentary evidence, the paper trail. Let's say you're arguing with your landlord about a repair that never got done. You could say, "You promised to fix the leak 3 months ago," but that's just your word against theirs. Instead, you pull out the email chain. On March 15th, you wrote, and I quote, "We'll have someone out there by the end of the week." Here's the follow-up I sent on March 22nd. Here's the one from April 3rd. No one ever came. Game over. In business, relationships, consumer disputes, always create a paper trail. Always document. Lawyers live by this rule because they know that memory is unreliable and people lie, but documents don't. When you're building your case in any important conversation, reference specific dates, specific communications, specific agreements. Don't say "you always" or "you never." Say "on these 3 occasions" and name them. The moment you pull out receipts, literal or figurative, you shift from opinion to fact. And facts are very hard to argue with. Testimonial evidence, the power of third-party validation. Lawyers don't just tell juries what happened. They bring in witnesses who saw it happen. You should do the same. Let's say you're in a performance review and your manager says you haven't been collaborative. Don't just defend yourself, bring witnesses. That's interesting because Jennifer from marketing specifically told me last week that our collaboration on the product launch was the smoothest cross-team project she'd worked on this year. And Tom from sales mentioned in our last meeting that the support I provided helped close the Henderson account. I'd be happy to have them join this conversation if that would be helpful. You've just brought in witnesses without them even being in the room. This works everywhere. Arguing with a contractor about the quality of their work? 3 neighbors who've had similar work done told me this isn't up to standard. Would you like their contact information? Debating a return policy with a store manager? I spoke with your corporate customer service line this morning, and they confirmed that this falls under your 60-day return policy. Third-party validation removes the he said, she said dynamic. It's no longer just your opinion, it's corroborated testimony. And as Abraham Lincoln, a trial lawyer before he became president, once said, discourage litigation. Persuade your neighbors to compromise whenever you can. As a peacemaker, the lawyer has the superior opportunity of being a good man. But when compromise fails, bring your witnesses. Physical evidence. Show, don't just tell. In a trial, nothing is more powerful than physical evidence. The weapon, the photo, the damaged product. It's tangible. It's real. It's undeniable. You can use the same principle in your arguments. Trying to convince your team that the current software is slowing productivity? Don't just complain, show them. It took me 7 minutes to generate this report yesterday. I timed it. Here's the screen recording. Our old system did it in 90 seconds. Want your partner to understand why you need help with household tasks? Don't just say you're overwhelmed, show them. I made a list of everything I did this week. 32 distinct tasks. Here's what you handled. I'm not trying to keep score, but I need you to see the imbalance so we can fix it together. Physical evidence turns abstract complaints into concrete reality. It's the difference between "I feel like I'm doing everything" and "here are the 32 things I did" versus the 8 things you did. The 3-part structure: claim, evidence, significance. Now here's how lawyers organize their case, and how you should structure any important argument. 1. Make your claim. State your position clearly. 2. Present your evidence, back it up with proof. 3. Explain the significance, tell them why it matters. Example: I believe I've earned a promotion to senior analyst. Claim: over the past year, I've led 4 major projects that generated $1.2 million in new revenue. I've mentored 3 junior team members who've all exceeded their targets, and I've taken on responsibilities that the job description for senior analyst specifically includes. Evidence: this promotion isn't just about recognition. It's about aligning my title and compensation with the value I'm already delivering to this company. Significance. See how that works? You're not begging. You're not emotional. You're presenting a case that's nearly impossible to refute. Common evidence mistakes to avoid. First, don't use weak evidence. Everyone knows that. Or I heard somewhere that. Isn't evidence. It's hearsay, and it'll get destroyed in any serious argument. Second, don't overload. Lawyers know that 10 weak pieces of evidence are worse than 3 strong ones. Quality over quantity. If you have one devastating email that proves your point, lead with that. Don't bury it under 15 mediocre examples. Third, don't present evidence without context. Always connect it back to your main argument. Here's the email isn't enough. Here's the email where they explicitly agreed to our terms, which directly contradicts what they're claiming now. That's how you use evidence. Fourth, anticipate counter-evidence. Good lawyers know what evidence the other side has before they walk into court. You should too. If there's a fact that seems to contradict your position, address it head-on before they do. Now, you might point out that the project was delivered late. That's true. But here's the email from the client where they changed the scope 3 times, which the timeline didn't account for. When you acknowledge weak points in your own case, you build credibility. When you pretend they don't exist, you lose trust. Building credibility through precision. Here's something most people don't realize. Specificity equals credibility. When you say, "I've worked here a long time," that's vague. When you say, "I've worked here for 4 years, 7 months," that's precise. Precision signals that you know what you're talking about. Lawyers do this constantly. They don't say, "The defendant was driving fast." They say, "The defendant was traveling at 73 miles per hour in a 45 mile per hour zone, as confirmed by the officer's radar gun." Apply this to your life. Don't say, "I always respond quickly to emails." Say, "My average email response time last quarter was 2.3 hours, according to our CRM system." The more specific you are, the more credible you become. And credibility is the foundation of persuasion. The bottom line: your opening statement gets attention. Your evidence wins the argument. Without proof, you're just sharing an opinion. With proof, you're making a case that demands to be taken seriously. As the legendary attorney Louis Nizer once wrote, "A man who works with his hands is a laborer. A man who works with his hands and his brain is a craftsman. But a man who works with his hands and his brain and his heart is an artist." Building a strong case isn't just about facts. It's about crafting those facts into a compelling narrative that people can't ignore. In the next chapter, we're going to explore cross-examination, the skill of asking questions that expose weaknesses, reveal truth, and control the conversation without ever raising your voice. But first, master this. Never make a claim you can't prove. And when you can prove it so thoroughly that disagreement becomes impossible. Chapter 3. The Cross-Examination. How to ask questions that win arguments. In every courtroom drama you've ever watched, there's that moment. The lawyer stands up, approaches the witness, and with a series of carefully crafted questions, completely dismantles their story. No shouting, no aggression, just questions. Strategic, surgical, devastating questions. That's cross-examination, and it's the most powerful communication tool you'll ever learn. Here's the secret that lawyers know. The person asking the questions controls the conversation. Not the person with the loudest voice. Not the person with the fanciest title. The person asking the questions. Think about it. When you're answering questions, you're reactive. You're defensive. You're on their turf, playing their game. But when you're asking questions, you're in complete control. You decide what gets discussed. You decide the pace. You decide where the conversation goes. Most people argue by making statements. "You're wrong. That doesn't make sense. I disagree." And what happens? The other person makes statements back. "No, you're wrong." Now you're just two people yelling opinions at each other, and nothing gets resolved. Lawyers don't do that. They ask questions. And not just any questions. Questions that lead the witness exactly where they want them to go. The golden rule of cross-examination. Here it is. Never ask a question you don't already know the answer to. This is the cardinal rule of cross-examination, and it applies to every important conversation you'll ever have. When a lawyer cross-examines a witness, they're not fishing for information. They already know the facts. They've done their homework. They've read the depositions. They've reviewed the evidence. The questions aren't designed to learn. They're designed to expose. Let me show you how this works in real life. Your coworker publicly claims credit for an idea that was actually yours. The amateur response: "That was my idea." Now you're just making a statement they can deny. The lawyer response: "Questions. Just to clarify, when did you first propose this idea? And where was that conversation? In a meeting or via email?" Interesting, because I have the email I sent to the team on March 10th outlining this exact approach. Do you remember receiving that email? So when you presented this idea yesterday, were you building on the framework I outlined in that email? Or did you arrive at the same conclusion independently? See what just happened? You didn't accuse them of anything. You didn't get emotional. You just asked questions you already knew the answers to, and let them dig their own hole. The funnel technique, from broad to narrow. Effective cross-examination follows a pattern. You start with broad questions that seem harmless, then gradually narrow down until there's nowhere left to hide. Let's say you're negotiating with a contractor who's trying to charge you for work that wasn't completed. Here's how a lawyer would handle it. You completed the bathroom renovation, correct? And the contract specified that the work would include new tile, new fixtures, and new lighting? Looking at the bathroom now, the tile is done and the fixtures are installed, yes? But the lighting, we agreed on recessed LED lighting, correct? And what's currently installed? So the original fixture is still there? Which means that part of the contracted work wasn't completed? Each question is simple. Each answer is a small concession. But by the end, they've admitted that the work is incomplete. You didn't argue. You didn't accuse. You just asked questions that led them to your conclusion. The power of yes questions. Trial lawyers know that getting someone to say yes repeatedly creates momentum. It's psychological. The more times someone agrees with you, the harder it becomes for them to suddenly disagree. So you structure your questions to get a series of confirmations before you make your key point. You were responsible for the Johnson account, correct? Yes. And the client specifically requested monthly progress reports. Yes. Those reports were due on the 1st of each month? Yes. And you were aware of this deadline? Yes. So when the client complained that they didn't receive March's report, that was because it wasn't sent. Well, I was busy with. Was the March report sent on March 1st, yes or no? You've built a ladder of agreements that makes the final answer impossible to dodge. The Columbo Method. Playing dumb to get smart answers. Remember the old TV detective Columbo? He'd act confused, scratch his head, and say, "Just one more thing." Then he'd ask the question that solved the case. This technique is gold in cross-examination. When you act like you're trying to understand rather than trying to win, people let their guard down. Help me understand something. You said the report would be ready by Friday, but it's Tuesday and it's not done. What am I missing? You're not attacking. You're just confused. And now they have to explain themselves, which often means exposing the truth. I'm a little confused. You told the client the product does X, but the specifications say it does Y. Can you walk me through that? Again, you're not accusing them of lying. You're just asking them to clarify. But that clarification often reveals the lie. As the great trial lawyer F. Lee Bailey once said, "Can any of you seriously say the Bill of Rights could get through Congress today? It wouldn't even get out of committee." The point: sometimes the most powerful questions are the ones that make people think about what they're actually defending. The lock-in technique. This is devastating when used correctly. You get someone to commit to a specific version of events, then you introduce evidence that contradicts it. So just to be clear, you're saying you never received my email about the deadline change? That's right. Never got it. And you check your email regularly? Every day. Okay, I'm pulling up my sent folder right now. Here's the email, sent to your address on April 3rd at 2:47 p.m. And here's the read receipt showing it was opened on April 3rd at 3:12 p.m. So either you did receive it and forgot, or someone else has access to your email. Which is it? They're locked in. There's no escape. And you did it all with questions. Questions that expose contradiction. One of the most powerful tools in cross-examination is getting people to contradict themselves. You do this by asking about the same fact from different angles. You said you were at the office until 7 p.m. that night, correct? Yes. Then, 15 minutes later in the conversation. And what time did you say you picked up your kids from soccer practice? 6:30. Interesting. The soccer field is 20 minutes from the office. So you left the office before 6:10 to get there by 6:30. Well, yeah, I guess. But earlier you said you were at the office until 7 p.m. Which one is accurate? You've just caught them in a contradiction, not by accusing them of lying, but by asking questions that revealed the inconsistency. The silence weapon. Here's a technique that makes most people uncomfortable, but is incredibly effective. After you ask a question, shut up. Don't fill the silence. Don't rephrase. Don't add to the question. Just wait. People hate silence. They'll rush to fill it. And when they're uncomfortable, they often say more than they intended to. Why wasn't this task completed on time? Then silence. Just wait. Let them squirm. Let them explain. The longer you wait, the more they'll reveal. Lawyers use this in depositions all the time. They ask a question, get an answer, then just stare. And the witness, uncomfortable with the silence, keeps talking. And that's when the truth comes out. The echo technique. When someone says something you want them to reconsider, just repeat it back to them as a question. I didn't have time to review the contract before signing. You didn't have time to review a $50,000 contract before signing it? Hearing their own words reflected back often makes people realize how weak their position is. Avoiding cross-examination mistakes. Don't ask compound questions. Did you know about the deadline and did you intentionally ignore it? That's two questions. They can answer one and dodge the other. Ask one question at a time. Don't ask, why questions if you want a simple answer. Why didn't you send the report? Opens the door for a long explanation full of excuses. Did you send the report, yes or no? Is harder to dodge. Don't argue with the answer. If they say something you disagree with, don't debate it. Ask another question that exposes the flaw. The bottom line. Questions are power. They control the conversation, expose the truth, and force people to confront facts they'd rather avoid. When you master the art of asking the right questions in the right order, you don't need to argue. The answers argue for you. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about handling objections. What to do when someone challenges your position and how to turn their attacks into opportunities. But remember this. In any argument, the person making statements is playing defense. The person asking questions is playing offense. And offense wins. Chapter 4. Handling objections, turning attacks into opportunities. In a courtroom, the moment a lawyer presents evidence or asks a question that threatens the other side, you'll hear it. Objection, Your Honor. It's a challenge, an interruption, an attempt to derail your momentum and protect their case. And here's what separates great lawyers from mediocre ones. Great lawyers expect objections. They prepare for them. And when they come, they don't panic. They respond with precision, turning defensive moments into offensive opportunities. The same thing happens in your life every single day. You make a proposal at work, and someone objects. You present an idea, and someone challenges it. You set a boundary, and someone pushes back. Most people crumble when this happens. They get defensive. They backpedal. They apologize for positions they shouldn't apologize for. Not anymore. Because today you're going to learn what lawyers know. Objections aren't obstacles, they're opportunities. The psychology of objections. First, understand this. When someone objects to your argument, it's rarely about the facts. It's about psychology. They're protecting something, their ego, their position, their fear of being wrong, their need for control. Your job isn't to steamroll their objection. It's to understand what they're really protecting, then address that underlying concern while maintaining your position. Let's say you're in a meeting and you propose a new strategy. Your colleague objects. That's never going to work. We tried something similar 3 years ago and it failed. The amateur hears that and gets defensive. This is different. You don't understand. Now you're arguing about whether your idea is similar to the old one, which is a losing battle because you're letting them control the frame. The lawyer hears that objection and thinks, they're not really objecting to my idea. They're protecting themselves from the embarrassment of having backed a failed initiative 3 years ago. They're also signaling to everyone in the room that they have institutional knowledge. This isn't about my proposal, it's about their ego. So instead of defending, you do this. That's a great point, and your institutional knowledge is valuable here. What specifically failed about that initiative 3 years ago? You've just validated them, shifted from defense to inquiry, and created an opportunity to distinguish your proposal from the old one. Now they're explaining the old failure, which gives you ammunition to show how your approach is different. As Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg once said, "Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." Handling objections isn't about winning through force, it's about strategic persuasion. The 3-step objection framework. When someone objects to your position, use this framework. 1. Acknowledge. 2. Isolate. 3. Redirect. Let me show you how this works. Acknowledge. Never ignore or dismiss an objection. That's the fastest way to create an enemy. Instead, acknowledge it. I hear what you're saying. That's a fair concern. I understand why you'd think that. This isn't agreement, it's acknowledgement. You're showing respect for their position without conceding your own. Isolate. Once you've acknowledged, isolate the objection. Get specific about what exactly they're objecting to. Because often, objections are vague, and vague objections are impossible to address. When you say this won't work, are you concerned about the budget, the timeline, or the implementation process? Now they have to be specific. And once the objection is specific, it's manageable. Redirect. Finally, redirect the conversation back to your position, but through a frame that addresses their concern. I appreciate your concern about the budget. What if I showed you how this approach actually reduces costs in the long term? Would that change your perspective? You've acknowledged, isolated, and redirected, all without retreating from your original position. Common objections and how to destroy them. Objection. That's not realistic. Response. Help me understand what specific aspect seems unrealistic to you. Is it the timeline, the resources required, or something else? You're forcing them to be specific. Once they are, you can address that specific concern rather than defending against a vague criticism. Objection. We don't have the budget for that. Response. I agree, budget is a consideration. What if we could phase this in over 3 quarters instead of implementing all at once? Would that make it more feasible? You've acknowledged the constraint and offered a solution. Now they have to either accept your adaptation or reveal that budget wasn't really the issue. Objection. Nobody else does it that way. Response. You're absolutely right, which is exactly why this gives us a competitive advantage. What's your biggest concern about being an early adopter in this area? You've reframed their objection as your strength and invited them to voice their real concern. Objection. I don't think the team will go for it. Response. That's worth exploring. Which team members do you think would have concerns, and what do you think those concerns would be? Now they're either making specific predictions you can address, or they're revealing that this is actually their concern, not the team's. The inoculation technique. Here's an advanced move. Address objections before they're even raised. Lawyers do this in opening statements. They bring up the weaknesses in their own case before the other side can use them against them. This is called inoculation, and it's incredibly powerful. Let's say you're proposing a project that you know is expensive. Don't wait for someone to object about cost. Address it up front. I know the initial investment is significant. $200,000 is not a small number. But let me show you why this pays for itself within 18 months and generates $500,000 in savings over 3 years. You've just stolen their objection. They can't hit you with "this is too expensive" because you already addressed it. And by addressing it proactively, you've shown that you're thorough, you've done your homework, and you're not trying to hide anything. The yes and technique. This comes from improv comedy, but lawyers use it constantly. Instead of saying yes, but, which negates what came before, say yes and, which builds on it. This seems complicated. Amateur response. Yes, but it's necessary. Lawyer response. Yes, and that's exactly why we're breaking it into simple, manageable phases. The complexity is in the back end. The user experience will actually be simpler than what we have now. See the difference? Yes, but creates conflict. Yes, and creates collaboration. The boomerang technique. Sometimes the best way to handle an objection is to turn it back on the objector. Not aggressively, but strategically. I don't think we should move forward with this. I respect that. What would you need to see or know to feel differently? Now they're telling you exactly what it would take to convince them. They're literally giving you the roadmap to overcome their objection. When to stand firm. Not every objection deserves accommodation. Sometimes you need to hold your ground. Here's how lawyers do it without being aggressive. I understand your concern, and I've given it serious thought. But here's why I believe this is the right approach despite that concern. Then you restate your position with additional evidence or reasoning. The key is the phrase, despite that concern. You're not dismissing it, you're acknowledging it and explaining why your position stands anyway. The redirect question. When someone raises an objection that's meant to derail you, don't get sucked into defending. Redirect with a question. This idea seems risky. What would make it less risky in your view? Or, compared to what alternative? Because the risk of doing nothing is higher. You've just shifted from defending your idea to making them either contribute a solution or defend the status quo. The evidence response. Sometimes the best response to an objection is simply more evidence. I don't think customers want this. I appreciate that perspective. Let me share the survey results from 500 customers in our target demographic. 73% said they would switch to a provider that offered this feature. Here's the data. You didn't argue. You didn't get emotional. You just presented facts that make the objection irrelevant. The ultimate truth about objections. Here's what you need to internalize. When someone objects, they're engaging with your idea. Silence is worse than objections. Indifference is worse than resistance. An objection means they're taking you seriously enough to challenge you. The worst thing you can do is treat that engagement as an attack. It's not. It's an invitation to persuade. As trial lawyer Jerry Spence wrote, I would rather have a mind opened by wonder than one closed by belief. When someone objects, they're giving you the chance to open their mind. Don't waste it by getting defensive. In the next chapter, we're going to explore emotional control, how to stay calm, confident, and commanding even when arguments get heated and people try to provoke you. But first, remember this. Every objection is a door. Your job isn't to knock it down. It's to find the key that opens it. Chapter 5. Emotional Control. How to stay calm when everyone else is losing it. There's a moment in every trial when things get heated. A witness becomes hostile. Opposing counsel makes a personal attack. The stakes feel overwhelming. And in that moment, the lawyer who loses their composure loses the case. Because here's the truth. Emotions are contagious, but so is composure. When you get angry, you hand control to the other person. When you get defensive, you signal weakness. When you lose your cool, you lose your credibility. And once credibility is gone, it doesn't matter how good your arguments are. Nobody's listening anymore. The courtroom teaches a brutal lesson that applies to every argument you'll ever have. The calmest person in the room is the most powerful person in the room. Think about the last argument that went sideways for you. Maybe your voice got louder. Maybe your heart started racing. Maybe you said something you regretted. What happened to your ability to think clearly? It vanished. What happened to your persuasive power? Gone. Now think about someone you know who always stays calm under pressure. How do you feel around them? Probably a mix of respect and slight intimidation. That's not an accident. That's the power of emotional control. Why we lose control, and how lawyers avoid it. Your brain has two systems. The amygdala, your emotional, reactive, survival-oriented brain, and the prefrontal cortex, your logical, strategic thinking brain. When someone attacks you, criticizes you, or challenges you in a way that feels personal, your amygdala takes over. It perceives the argument as a threat, just like it would perceive a physical attack. And what does your amygdala do with threats? Fight or flight. So you either blow up, fight, or you shut down, flight. Neither response wins arguments. Lawyers train themselves to keep the prefrontal cortex in charge. They do this through a combination of preparation, technique, and practice. And you can do the same. The pause principle. Here's the simplest and most powerful technique for emotional control. Pause before you respond. When someone says something that triggers you, don't react immediately. Take a breath. Count to 3 in your head. Let the emotional wave crest and pass. Trial lawyers do this constantly. Watch any courtroom footage and you'll notice. When opposing counsel makes an aggressive statement, the best lawyers don't jump up immediately. They pause. They let the moment breathe. Then they respond with precision. That pause does 3 things. First, it prevents you from saying something stupid. The first response that comes to mind when you're emotional is almost always the wrong one. Second, it signals confidence. Anxious people rush to fill silence. Confident people are comfortable with it. Third, it lets your rational brain catch up to your emotional brain. That 3-second pause is enough time for your prefrontal cortex to regain control. Try this. Next time someone criticizes you or challenges you, before you respond, take a visible breath and say, "Let me think about that for a second." Then actually think. You've just bought yourself time and demonstrated composure. The emotional labeling technique. Here's something hostage negotiators and trial lawyers both use. When someone is emotional, label their emotion out loud. I can see this is frustrating for you. It sounds like you're concerned about how this will affect your team. I understand this is a stressful situation. This does something remarkable. It validates their emotion without agreeing with their position. And once someone feels heard, their emotional temperature drops. They move from reactive to receptive. You're not saying they're right. You're saying you recognize what they're feeling. And that recognition often de-escalates the entire conversation. Compare these 2 responses to an angry client. Response A: you need to calm down. You're being unreasonable. Response B: I can hear how frustrated you are, and I want to make this right. Help me understand exactly what happened. Response A escalates. Response B de-escalates. Same situation, completely different outcomes. The verbal Aikido approach. Aikido is a martial art where you don't block attacks, you redirect them. The same principle applies to emotional arguments. When someone attacks you verbally, don't block it by defending yourself. Redirect it. You're always late with these reports. Block response. That's not true. I'm usually on time. Redirect response. You're right that timeliness matters. Let's look at what's causing delays and how we can prevent them. You've acknowledged their concern, avoided a fight about the word always, and moved the conversation toward solutions. You've redirected their emotional energy into something productive. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. When someone loses control, your power comes from maintaining yours. The broken record technique. Sometimes people try to provoke you by repeating the same attack over and over, or by escalating their emotion to trigger yours. When this happens, use the broken record technique. Calmly repeat your position without changing your tone or adding emotion. This is completely unacceptable. I understand you're unhappy. Here's what I can do to address it. I said this is unacceptable. I hear you. And here's what I can do to address it. You're not listening to me. I am listening. And here's what I can do to address it. Your calm repetition highlights their escalation. The contrast makes them look unreasonable, and you look composed. Eventually, they either calm down or exhaust themselves. Physical control creates emotional control. Your body and mind are connected. When you control your body, you control your emotions. Lawyers know this, which is why they train themselves in specific physical behaviors. Slow your breathing. When you're emotional, your breathing gets shallow and fast. Deliberately slow it down. Breathe in for 4 counts, out for 4 counts. This physiologically triggers your parasympathetic nervous system, your calm down system. Lower your voice. When someone raises their voice, the instinct is to match their volume. Do the opposite. Speak more quietly. They'll have to calm down to hear you, and your quiet confidence will contrast with their loud emotion. Control your hands. Don't point. Don't gesture wildly. Keep your hands still or use slow, deliberate movements. Lawyers do this in court because it signals control. Maintain eye contact. Breaking eye contact signals submission or discomfort. Steady, not aggressive. Eye contact signals that you're unbothered by their emotion. Stand or sit still. Fidgeting, pacing, or shifting your weight broadcasts anxiety. Stillness broadcasts confidence. Your body language tells everyone in the room whether you're in control or spiraling. Choose control. The reframe under fire. When someone makes a personal attack designed to provoke you, reframe it as a professional issue. You don't know what you're talking about. Emotional response. How dare you? I've been doing this for 10 years. Lawyer response. Let's focus on the specific data rather than personal assessments. Here are the numbers that support my position. You've just reframed a personal attack as a professional disagreement. You didn't take the bait. You didn't get defensive. You redirected to facts. The strategic timeout. Sometimes the smartest move is to pause the entire conversation. I can see we're both getting frustrated, and I don't think we're going to make progress in this state. Why don't we take a 15-minute break and come back to this? This isn't weakness. It's strategic intelligence. Lawyers call for recesses when they need to regroup. You can do the same in any argument that's becoming unproductive. The key is to frame it as a mutual benefit, not a retreat. Let's take a break so we can both think clearly is different from, I need to get away from you. Preparing for emotional triggers. Great lawyers prepare for emotional moments before they happen. They know which topics will trigger them, which tactics opposing counsel might use, and they rehearse their responses. You should do the same. Think about what makes you lose control in arguments. Is it being interrupted? Being accused of something you didn't do? Having your competence questioned? Being compared to someone else? Identify your triggers, then prepare your response. If being interrupted triggers you, prepare this response. I'd like to finish my thought, then I'll hear yours. If having your competence questioned triggers you, I understand you have concerns. Let me walk you through my qualifications and experience in this area. If being compared to someone else triggers you, I'm not other person. Let's discuss my proposal on its own merits. When you prepare for emotional moments, you remove the surprise factor. And without surprise, the trigger loses most of its power. The power of the so what test. When someone says something meant to upset you, ask yourself, so what? You're not as experienced as the other candidates. So what? Experience isn't the only factor. And you can make that case without getting defensive. Everyone's talking about your mistake. So what? What matters is how you fix it and what you learn from it. The so what test helps you distinguish between actual problems that need addressing and emotional provocations that deserve no response. The ultimate emotional truth. Here's what you must understand. Your emotional control is not about suppressing feelings. It's about choosing when and how to express them. Lawyers feel anger, frustration, fear, and stress just like everyone else. The difference is they don't let those feelings dictate their behavior in critical moments. You can feel insulted and choose not to act insulted. You can feel attacked and choose not to counterattack. You can feel your heart racing and still speak calmly. That's not being fake. That's being strategic. As the great trial lawyer Clarence Darrow said, the only real lawyers are trial lawyers, and trial lawyers try cases to juries. And juries don't trust lawyers who lose control. They trust lawyers who remain steady under pressure. The same applies to your colleagues, your clients, your partners, your friends. They trust the person who stays calm when everything is falling apart. In the next chapter, we're going to explore the Socratic Method, the art of winning arguments not by telling people they're wrong, but by asking questions that lead them to discover the truth themselves. But here's what you need to lock in right now. Whoever controls their emotions controls the argument. And control is a choice, not a personality trait. Starting today, you choose composure. Chapter 6, The Socratic Method, Winning Arguments Without Telling Anyone They're Wrong. Socrates never lost an argument. Not because he shouted louder, not because he had more facts, but because he perfected something remarkable. He got people to argue against themselves. He didn't tell people they were wrong. He asked questions that made them realize it on their own. And when someone discovers a flaw in their own logic, they can't defend it. They can't dismiss it. They have to confront it. This is the Socratic Method, and it's the most elegant weapon in your argumentative arsenal. Here's why it's so powerful. When you tell someone they're wrong, their brain immediately goes into defense mode. They stop listening. They start building counterarguments. Everything you say gets filtered through their need to protect their ego. But when you ask questions that lead them to the truth, something different happens. They feel like they're discovering insights rather than being lectured. Their ego isn't threatened because they're arriving at the conclusion themselves. Lawyers use this in cross-examination constantly. The best lawyers rarely make direct accusations. Instead, they ask a series of questions that paint an undeniable picture. Let me show you how this works in everyday life. The foundation: ask, don't tell. Your coworker insists on using a software platform that you know is inefficient. The amateur approach: that software is terrible. We need something better. Now they're defending the software, defending their choice, defending their competence. You've created an adversary. The Socratic approach: how long does it typically take you to generate a report with that software? About 2 hours. And how often do you need to generate those reports? 3 times a week. So that's about 6 hours a week just on reports? Yeah, I guess so. What if there was a way to do the same reports in 30 minutes? Would that free up time for other priorities? Well, sure, but would you be open to looking at an alternative if it could save you 5 hours a week? See what happened? You didn't attack their choice. You just asked questions that made them recognize the problem themselves. Now they're curious about solutions instead of defensive about their current approach. The 3-question pattern. The Socratic Method follows a pattern. You start with questions that establish facts everyone agrees on. Then you ask questions that reveal inconsistencies. Then you ask questions that lead to the inevitable conclusion. Let's say someone in your life constantly complains about their job, but refuses to look for a new one. Step 1. Establish agreement. You've been saying you're unhappy at work for a while now, right? Yeah, I hate it. And you're good at what you do. You have marketable skills? Definitely. Step 2. Reveal inconsistency. So you're unhappy in your current role, and you have the skills to get a different job. But you haven't started looking for anything new. Well, the job market is tough. Is the market tougher now than it was 6 months ago when your friend Sarah found a new position in the same field? I guess not, but... Step 3. Lead to conclusion. So if the market isn't the real obstacle, what do you think is actually stopping you from looking? Now they have to confront the real issue: fear, comfort zone, whatever it is. And they arrive there through their own logic, not your accusation. The "help me understand" technique. This phrase is magic. It frames your questions as genuine curiosity rather than criticism. Someone proposes a plan that makes no financial sense. Instead of, "That's going to lose money," try, "Help me understand the financial model here. If we spend $50,000 up front and the revenue per customer is $200, how many customers do we need to break even?" You're making them do the math. You're making them confront the numbers. And when they realize it doesn't add up, it's their realization, not your criticism. As Socrates himself demonstrated in Plato's dialogues, the wisest approach is often to say, "I know that I know nothing." When you position yourself as seeking understanding rather than dispensing judgment, people open up instead of shutting down. Exposing logical fallacies through questions. People make logical errors all the time. The Socratic Method exposes them without direct confrontation. Someone says, "Everyone's doing it this way, so it must be right." Socratic response. When you say everyone, how many companies are we talking about specifically? And do we know their results? Because I'm curious if everyone doing it means it's effective, or if it just means it's common. You've just exposed the bandwagon fallacy without calling them out directly. Someone says, "We've always done it this way." Socratic response. How long is always? And have our circumstances changed since we started doing it that way? I'm wondering if what worked 5 years ago still makes sense today. Again, you're not attacking their position. You're just asking questions that make them reconsider it. The assumption check. Most arguments rest on unstated assumptions. The Socratic Method brings those assumptions into the light. Someone says, "We can't launch this product until it's perfect." Socratic response. What does perfect look like specifically? And how will we know when we've achieved it? I'm also curious, what's the cost of waiting to reach perfection versus launching something very good and improving it based on feedback? You've just challenged the assumption that perfection is achievable or even desirable, but you did it through questions. The comparison question. This forces people to examine their position against alternatives. You want to hire more staff to handle the workload. What other options have you considered? And how does the cost-benefit of hiring compare to those alternatives? Now they have to defend their solution against other possibilities. If they haven't considered alternatives, the questions reveal that gap in their thinking. The consequence chain. Walk people through the logical consequences of their position using questions. Someone wants to cut the marketing budget. If we cut marketing by 30%, what happens to lead generation? It probably goes down. And if lead generation goes down, what happens to sales? They decrease. And if sales decrease, how does that affect revenue? Revenue drops. So we save $50,000 on marketing, but potentially lose $200,000 in revenue. Does that math work for our goals? They've talked themselves out of their own bad idea. The burden of proof flip. Instead of defending your position, ask questions that make them defend theirs. I don't think this strategy will work. Instead of defending your strategy, ask, what specific aspect concerns you? And what would success look like in your view? I'm curious what criteria you're using to evaluate this. Now they have to articulate clear objections instead of vague doubts. And often, when people try to be specific about vague concerns, they realize the concerns aren't as solid as they thought. The alternative reality test. Ask questions that explore what would have to be true for their position to make sense. Someone insists a competitor's success is just luck. For that to be pure luck, what would have to be true? Would they have to accidentally hire talented people, accidentally create good products, and accidentally execute effective marketing? All by chance? Does that seem likely? Or might there be something we could learn from their approach? You've made them confront the absurdity of their position without calling it absurd. The silence after the question. Here's a critical technique. After you ask a Socratic question, shut up. Don't fill the silence. Don't rephrase. Don't answer your own question. Let them think. Let them struggle with the implications. The discomfort of that silence is where the learning happens. That's where they confront the weakness in their argument. Common Socratic mistakes to avoid. Don't ask questions in a condescending tone. Your tone should be genuinely curious, not sarcastic or judgmental. If you sound like you're mocking them, the method backfires. Don't ask too many questions too fast. Give them time to think. If you rapid-fire questions, it feels like an interrogation, not a dialogue. Don't ask questions you're not prepared to hear answered. Sometimes the Socratic method reveals that your position is the weak one. Be open to that possibility. Don't use questions to avoid stating your own position. The Socratic method is a tool for testing ideas, not a way to hide what you think. The power dynamic shift. Here's what makes the Socratic method so powerful. It shifts the burden from you proving your point to them defending theirs. You're not making claims they can attack. You're asking questions they have to answer. And every answer either strengthens your position or weakens theirs. When to use the Socratic method. This technique works best when you're dealing with someone who's defensive, someone who's locked into a position, or someone who needs to discover the truth themselves rather than being told. It's perfect for challenging bad ideas without creating enemies, coaching someone toward better decisions, exposing flawed logic without direct confrontation, getting buy-in by making people feel ownership of conclusions. As the great defense attorney Johnny Cochran demonstrated during the O.J. Simpson trial with his famous line, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." Sometimes the most powerful arguments are the ones that let the evidence speak through strategic questioning. The ultimate truth. The Socratic method respects people's intelligence while challenging their conclusions. It says, "I trust you to think this through if I ask the right questions." That respect, combined with logical rigor, makes it one of the most persuasive techniques ever developed. In the next chapter, we're going to explore the power of framing and reframing, how to control the narrative by controlling the language. Remember, the person who asks the questions controls the conversation, and the person who helps others discover the truth wins the argument without ever firing a shot. Chapter 7, Reframing the Narrative, how to control the conversation by controlling the language. Words create reality. Not the reality of what actually happened, but the reality of how people perceive what happened. And in arguments, perception is everything. Trial lawyers know this better than anyone. The same event can be described a dozen different ways, and each description creates a completely different emotional response. A killing versus a tragic accident. An aggressive business strategy versus predatory monopolistic behavior. Same facts. Different frames. different verdicts. This is the power of reframing. The ability to take any situation, any argument, any conflict, and present it in a way that serves your purpose. Not by lying, not by manipulating facts, but by choosing the lens through which those facts are viewed. And here's what you need to understand. Whoever frames the conversation first usually wins. Because once a frame is established, it takes enormous effort to change it. The brain doesn't easily let go of its first interpretation. What is a frame? A frame is the context that determines meaning. It's the difference between half empty and half full. The glass hasn't changed. The frame has. In court, lawyers use framing constantly. A prosecutor doesn't say the defendant took money from the company. They say the defendant stole from hardworking employees' retirement funds. Same action, completely different frame. One is abstract, the other is visceral. You can use this same technique in every conversation that matters. Your boss says you missed the deadline. That's their frame, you as unreliable. You reframe. The scope expanded by 40% mid-project, and I prioritized quality over speed to avoid delivering something substandard. Now the frame is you as thoughtful and quality-focused, not unreliable. See how that works? The positive reframe. This is your first tool. Take something that sounds negative and reframe it as positive without changing the facts. Someone criticizes your product for being expensive. Don't defend the price. Reframe it. You're right, we're not the cheapest option. We're the premium option for clients who value quality and long-term performance over short-term savings. You've just reframed expensive as premium. You've reframed high price as long-term value. Someone says you're stubborn. You reframe. I'm persistent when I believe in something. I don't give up easily. Same behavior. Different frame. One sounds like a flaw. The other sounds like strength. As legendary trial lawyer Jerry Spence wrote, I would rather have a mind opened by wonder than one closed by belief. Reframing opens minds by offering new perspectives on the same information. The problem-solution reframe. People love to focus on problems. Lawyers reframe problems as opportunities for solutions. Your team is behind schedule. The problem frame. We're failing to meet deadlines. The solution reframe. We're identifying inefficiencies in our process that, once addressed, will make us faster and more effective long-term. You've taken a failure and reframed it as a learning opportunity. Same situation, but now the conversation shifts from blame to improvement. A client complains about a feature your product doesn't have. The problem frame. We don't offer that. The solution reframe. That's not part of our current offering because we've focused on perfecting X and Y first. But I'd love to understand your need for that feature. It might influence our roadmap. You've reframed a limitation as intentional focus, and you've made the client feel heard. The compared to what? Reframe. Context is everything. When someone presents information in a way that makes you look bad, change the context. Someone says, your department spent $500,000 last quarter. Sounds like a lot, right? Reframe it. We spent $500,000 and generated $2.3 million in revenue. That's a 460% return on investment. Compared to industry standard ROI of 250%, we're significantly outperforming. You've just reframed spending as investment, and you've changed the context from absolute numbers to relative performance. Your competitor says, we've been in business for 50 years. They're framing experience as an advantage. Reframe it. They've been doing the same thing for 50 years. We've been innovating for 5, which is why we're using technology they haven't adopted yet. You've reframed their longevity as stagnation and your newness as agility. The perspective shift. Sometimes the most powerful reframe is simply changing whose perspective you're viewing the situation from. Your company wants to cut employee benefits. From the company's perspective, we need to reduce costs. Reframe it from the employee's perspective. You're asking people who've driven company growth to accept less while profits hit record highs. How does that align with our stated values about valuing our team? You've just shifted the entire conversation by changing the perspective. The time horizon reframe. Short-term versus long-term framing changes everything. Someone objects to your proposal because of upfront costs. They're using a short-term frame. Reframe to long-term. You're absolutely right that year 1 shows a cost. But look at the 5-year projection. By year 3, we're breaking even. By year 5, we've saved $800,000. Are we optimizing for this quarter or for sustainable growth? You've just reframed the conversation from immediate expense to long-term investment. The what this really means reframe. Take surface-level criticism and reframe it to reveal the deeper truth. Someone says, "You ask too many questions in meetings." Surface level, that sounds like criticism. Reframe it. "What I'm hearing is that you value efficiency in meetings." I agree. The reason I ask questions is to prevent us from moving forward with unclear assumptions that cost us more time later. Would you prefer I ask those questions one-on-one after meetings instead? You've reframed asking too many questions as preventing costly mistakes and offered a compromise. The burden reframe. When someone frames something as your burden, reframe it as a shared responsibility or their opportunity. A team member says, "This is going to be a lot of work for me." Don't apologize. Reframe. "You're right, this is a significant project." It's also the kind of high-visibility work that demonstrates leadership capability. I'm thinking about who's ready for that level of responsibility. You've reframed burden as opportunity. Now they're reconsidering their objection. The assumption reframe. People often present their assumptions as facts. Reframe by exposing the assumption. Someone says, "Customers won't pay that much." That's an assumption presented as fact. Reframe it. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that customers who value quality will pay premium prices, and price-sensitive customers weren't our target market anyway. What data are we basing our assumptions on? You've reframed their certainty as an untested hypothesis. The villain reframe. In stories, the villain isn't the person who does bad things. It's whoever the story is told against. Lawyers know this. They make sure their client isn't the villain of the story. If someone is framing you as the problem, reframe to identify the real villain. I understand you're frustrated with the delay. I am too. The real issue here is that we didn't have clear specifications from the beginning, which created rework. Let's talk about how we prevent that systemic problem going forward. You've just reframed yourself from villain to fellow victim of a systemic problem. Language precision. The specific words you choose create specific frames. Lawyers are meticulous about word choice for this reason. Don't say cost. Say investment. Don't say problem. Say challenge or opportunity. Don't say failure. Say learning experience. Don't say cheap. Say affordable or accessible. Don't say stubborn. Say committed or persistent. These aren't euphemisms. They're strategic frames that highlight different aspects of the same reality. The yes and reframe. When someone presents information that seems to contradict your position, don't fight it. Reframe it as compatible. The data shows customer complaints increased 15% last quarter. Amateur response. But sales are up. Lawyer response. Yes, and that tells us something important. We're growing fast, and our customer service infrastructure hasn't scaled with that growth. That's actionable intelligence. You've reframed increased complaints from "we're failing" to "we're growing and need to scale support." The emotional reframe. Sometimes you need to reframe the emotional temperature of a conversation. Someone is angry and accusatory. Don't match their emotion. Reframe it as concern. "I can hear that you're really frustrated. It sounds like you're concerned about whether this is going to work. Is that accurate?" You've just reframed anger as concern. Concern is easier to address than anger. And once they confirm that yes, they're concerned, the conversation shifts from emotional to practical. The identity reframe. People will defend their identity fiercely. So reframe your position as aligned with how they see themselves. You're trying to convince a cost-conscious executive to invest in employee development. Don't frame it as spending money. Frame it as being the kind of leader who invests in people. I know you've always prioritized developing talent. It's one of the things that's made you successful. This program is a direct extension of that leadership philosophy. You've made saying no inconsistent with their identity. That's powerful. When reframing goes wrong, don't reframe in ways that deny obvious reality. If something is genuinely bad, don't try to reframe it as good. You'll lose credibility. Don't use reframing to avoid accountability. If you made a mistake, own it. Then reframe the conversation toward solutions. Don't over-reframe. If every negative becomes a positive in your language, people will stop trusting your judgment. The ultimate power. Here's the truth about reframing. Reality is negotiable. Not the facts, but the meaning we assign to those facts. Two lawyers can stand in front of the same jury with the same evidence and tell completely different stories. The one who frames it better usually wins. You have that same power in every conversation. The question is whether you'll use it strategically or let someone else control the narrative. In the next chapter, we're going to explore the power of silence, how knowing when not to speak can be more powerful than any argument you could make. Remember this: words don't just describe reality. They create it. Choose yours carefully, and you control the game. Chapter 8. The Power of Silence, when saying nothing says everything. There's a moment every trial lawyer knows. You've just asked a devastating question. The witness is scrambling for an answer. The jury is watching. And in that moment, the worst thing you could possibly do is speak. So you don't. You stand there, silent, waiting, letting the silence expand and fill the courtroom like water filling a container. The pressure builds. The witness squirms. And then inevitably they break. They start talking. And when people talk just to fill silence, they almost always say too much. This is the tactical weapon that most people never learn to use: silence. We live in a culture that's terrified of silence. We fill every pause with words, every gap with noise. We interpret silence as awkwardness, as weakness, as something to be avoided. But lawyers know different. They know that silence is power. They know that the person who can sit comfortably in silence while others squirm controls the entire room. And here's what you need to understand. In arguments, whoever speaks first usually loses. Why silence is powerful. Silence creates psychological pressure. When you stop talking, the other person feels compelled to fill the void. It's a deeply ingrained social instinct. We're uncomfortable with conversational gaps, so we rush to fill them. And when people rush to fill silence, they reveal things they didn't intend to reveal. They make concessions they didn't plan to make. They expose weaknesses in their position. Let me show you how this works. You're negotiating salary. You state your number. I'm looking for $95,000. The hiring manager looks at you. You feel the silence. Your instinct is to backpedal, to justify, to fill the gap. I mean, that's based on market research, but I'm flexible, and I understand if that's outside the range, we could probably. Stop. You just negotiated against yourself. You gave ground before they said a single word. Now watch what happens when you use silence strategically. I'm looking for $95,000. Then you stop talking. You maintain eye contact. You wait. The silence stretches for 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. The hiring manager breaks. That's higher than we initially budgeted. We were thinking closer to $85,000. Now you have information. You didn't volunteer concessions. You didn't weaken your position. You stayed silent, and they revealed their number. The pregnant pause. This is a lawyer's favorite technique. After making a key point, you pause. You let it sink in. You give your words weight by surrounding them with silence. The contract clearly states that payment was due on the 15th. Pause. 3 full seconds. It's now the 30th, and we haven't received payment. That pause gives the first statement time to land. It creates emphasis. It signals importance. When you rush from one sentence to the next, everything blends together. When you pause strategically, people remember what you said. Try this in your next important conversation. Make your key point, then count to 3 in your head before continuing. You'll feel awkward at first, but watch the other person's face. They're processing. They're absorbing. That pause just made your point twice as powerful. The answer that isn't. Here's an advanced technique. When someone asks you a question you don't want to answer, stay silent just long enough to make them uncomfortable, then answer a different question entirely. Why did this project come in over budget? 3-second pause. The important thing is that we delivered exceptional quality that the client loved, and they've already committed to a follow-up project worth 3 times this one. You didn't answer their question. You redirected, and the pause before your response made it seem thoughtful rather than evasive. Politicians and lawyers use this constantly. The silence before the non-answer gives it credibility. Silence as agreement confirmation. When you make a statement and the other person doesn't object, their silence becomes tacit agreement. Lawyers use this to lock in concessions. So we're agreed that the deadline was clear from the beginning? Silence. Great. So the issue isn't the deadline itself, but the execution. If they don't object during that pause, you've just established agreement on a key point. Their silence worked against them because you controlled it. The uncomfortable truth silence. Sometimes silence is the most powerful response to an accusation or insult. When someone attacks you, your instinct is to defend yourself immediately. But watch what happens when you don't. You completely drop the ball on this. You maintain eye contact. You don't speak. 5 seconds pass. Your silence forces them to either elaborate, backpedal, or sit in the discomfort of their own attack. Often they'll soften. There were some communication issues. Your silence just made them moderate their own attack. You didn't get defensive. You didn't argue. You just waited and they backed down. As Abraham Lincoln, who practiced law before the presidency, once said, "Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and to remove all doubt." Sometimes the smartest thing you can say is nothing at all. Silence after the close. In sales, in negotiations, in closing arguments, after you make your final pitch, shut up. Don't add qualifiers. Don't weaken your position with "just think about it" or "let me know." State your position, then go silent. Based on everything we've discussed, I think $120,000 is fair compensation for this role. Stop talking. Wait. The silence puts pressure on them to respond. And their response gives you information about how to proceed. If you keep talking after your close, you signal uncertainty. Silence signals confidence. The listening silence. Not all silence is tactical. Sometimes silence is simply powerful listening. When someone is explaining their position, don't interrupt. Don't formulate your response while they're talking. Just listen in complete silence. This does 2 things. First, it shows respect, which builds goodwill. Second, it often causes them to keep talking and reveal more than they intended. People interpret your silence as interest and keep elaborating. The more they talk, the more ammunition you have for your response. Silence as de-escalation. When someone is emotional or aggressive, silence can de-escalate faster than any words. They're yelling. You remain silent and calm. The contrast is stark. Your silence highlights their emotion. Eventually, they'll run out of steam. Then, when there's actual silence, you speak calmly and quietly. "Are you finished? Because I'd like to address this, but I need you to be ready to have a productive conversation." Your silence during their outburst gave you the moral high ground. Now you control the conversation. The negotiation silence. In any negotiation, the person who speaks first after an offer usually loses ground. This is negotiation 101, but most people can't handle the silence. They make an offer. $50,000 for the project. Amateur response. "Well, I was hoping for more, maybe $60,000, but I understand if that's too high, perhaps we could." Professional response. Silence. You literally say nothing. You might raise your eyebrows slightly or tilt your head, but you don't speak. They break the silence. "I might be able to do $55,000. They just negotiated against themselves. Your silence cost them $5,000. The courtroom stare. Lawyers perfect this. After asking a question, they don't just wait for an answer. They maintain steady eye contact in complete silence. It's not aggressive. It's expectant. It says, "I asked you a question, and I'm going to wait however long it takes for you to answer it honestly." This prevents people from dodging questions. Your silence and eye contact insist on a real answer. When silence backfires, don't use silence passive-aggressively. If you're giving someone the silent treatment out of anger, that's manipulation, not strategy. Don't stay silent when a response is genuinely required. If your boss asks a direct question, strategic silence might read as incompetence rather than confidence. Don't confuse silence with avoidance. Silence is a tool for emphasis and control, not for hiding from difficult conversations. The physical component. Silence only works if your body language supports it. If you're silent but fidgeting, looking away, or showing nervous energy, the silence signals discomfort rather than confidence. When you use strategic silence, maintain steady eye contact. Keep your body still. Breathe slowly and visibly. Relax your face. Don't fill the space with nervous gestures. Your physical calm amplifies the power of your verbal silence. The 3-second rule. If you take nothing else from this chapter, take this. Before responding to any important question or statement, count to 3. Someone makes you an offer. Count to 3. Someone asks a challenging question. Count to 3. Someone makes an accusation. Count to 3. Those 3 seconds serve multiple purposes. They give you time to think. They prevent emotional reactions. They create pressure on the other person. And they make your eventual response seem more considered and therefore more credible. The ultimate truth about silence. Most people are afraid of silence because they interpret it as emptiness. But lawyers know that silence isn't empty, it's full. Full of tension. Full of meaning. Full of power. When you master silence, you gain a tool that costs nothing, requires no preparation, and works in virtually every argumentative situation. You just have to be comfortable with discomfort. You have to trust that silence serves you better than anxious words. In the next chapter, we're going to discuss closing arguments, how to end any conversation, negotiation, or argument in a way that drives home your point and compels action. But here's what you need to remember. Your words have power. Your silence has even more. The question is whether you're brave enough to use it. Chapter 9. The Closing Argument. How to end every conversation with maximum impact. In a courtroom, the closing argument is where cases are won or lost. Everything that came before, the opening statement, the evidence, the cross-examination, it all builds to this moment. The lawyer stands before the jury one final time and delivers the story that will echo in their minds during deliberation. This is your last chance to persuade, your final opportunity to frame the narrative. And if you waste it, everything you've built crumbles. The same principle applies to every important conversation you'll ever have. It doesn't matter how well you started or how strong your evidence was. If you fumble the ending, people remember the fumble. But if you close with power and precision, that's what sticks. Here's the truth. People remember beginnings and endings more than middles. Psychologists call this the primacy and recency effect. Your opening gets their attention. Your closing determines their decision. So let's talk about how to close like a lawyer. How to end conversations in a way that compels action, shifts opinions, and leaves no doubt about where you stand. The 3 elements of a powerful close. Every effective closing argument contains 3 components: summary, significance, and call to action. Summary. You remind them of the key points. Not everything, just the 2 or 3 most important pieces of evidence or arguments that support your position. Significance. You tell them why it matters. You connect the facts to the outcome you want. You answer the so what question. Call to action. You tell them exactly what you want them to do next. Not vague suggestions, specific, concrete action. Let me show you how this works in a real-world scenario. You've just finished a performance review meeting where you made the case for a promotion. Here's how you close. Just to recap, over the past year, I've increased departmental efficiency by 23%. I've led 3 major projects that generated $1.8 million in new revenue, and I've taken on team leadership responsibilities that weren't in my original job description. Summary. This isn't just about recognition. It's about aligning my title and compensation with the value I'm already delivering to this company and ensuring you can retain that value long-term. Significance. I'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting next week where we can discuss the specific timeline and compensation package for this promotion. Does Tuesday or Thursday work better for you? Call to action. Notice what just happened. You didn't leave it vague. You didn't say think about it. You reminded them of your strongest points, explained why it matters to them, and asked for a specific next step with specific options. That's how you close. The callback technique. Great closings reference something from the opening. This creates a satisfying narrative arc that makes your argument feel complete and inevitable. In your opening, you might have said, "When I joined this team 2 years ago, you told me you were looking for someone who could grow with the company and eventually take on leadership. Today, I want to show you that I'm that person." In your closing, you call back to that. 2 years ago, you said you wanted someone who could grow into leadership. I've shown you today that I haven't just grown, I've already been leading. Now it's time to make that official. That callback creates resonance. It shows you how to plan from the beginning. It makes your argument feel cohesive and well thought out. As Clarence Darrow, one of America's greatest trial attorneys, demonstrated in his closing arguments, the first half of our lives is ruined by our parents, and the second half by our children. Even in serious matters, a memorable closing often contains an element that echoes earlier themes, giving the audience a sense of completion. The rule of 3. Human brains love patterns, and 3 is the magic number. When you're summarizing your key points in a closing, use 3. There are 3 reasons why this approach is the right one. First, it reduces costs by 30%. Second, it improves customer satisfaction, which we've seen decline for 2 quarters. Third, it positions us ahead of the competition before they adopt similar strategies. 3 points. Clear, memorable, persuasive. Not 2, which feels incomplete. Not 5, which feels overwhelming. 3. The future picture. Paint a picture of what happens if they accept your position, and contrast it with what happens if they don't. If we implement this system, 6 months from now we'll have automated 60% of manual data entry, freed up the team to focus on strategic work, and eliminated the errors that have cost us 3 client relationships this year. If we don't, we'll keep hemorrhaging clients to competitors who've already automated these processes, and we'll keep burning out talented team members on work that software should be doing. You've just made the decision feel obvious. One path leads to success. The other leads to continued problems. Which would you choose? The rhetorical question close. Questions engage the brain differently than statements. A well-placed rhetorical question at the end of your argument forces people to answer it in their own minds. And if you've built your case well, there's only one logical answer. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to be the company that leads this industry into the future, or the company that gets left behind watching our competitors innovate? You haven't told them what to decide. You've asked a question that, given everything you've presented, has an obvious answer. The personal appeal. Sometimes the most powerful close is simply human and direct. I've given you the data. I've shown you the evidence. Now I'm asking you directly. Give me the chance to prove this will work. Give me 3 months and the resources we've discussed, and if the results don't match what I've projected, we'll revisit. But I believe in this, and I'm asking you to believe in me. This works because it's vulnerable without being weak. It's confident without being arrogant. It's a human being making a direct request to another human being. The preemptive close. Address the objection you know is coming, then close despite it. I know some of you are thinking this timeline is aggressive. You're right, it is. But aggressive timelines create focus and urgency. And given that our competitor is launching their version in Q4, aggressive is exactly what we need. So here's what I'm proposing. We commit to this timeline, we allocate the resources, and we execute. We can do this. The question is whether we will. You've acknowledged the concern, reframed it as a strength, and closed with confidence. The evidence anchor. End with your single strongest piece of evidence. Not a summary of all evidence, your ace card. You've heard a lot today. But here's the one thing I want you to remember. Our customer retention rate has dropped 18% in 6 months. Every other metric we could debate, but that one is undeniable. And this proposal directly addresses it. That's why I'm asking for approval to move forward. Because if we don't stop the bleeding now, there won't be customers left to retain. One devastating fact. Then the ask. Simple. Powerful. The silence close. After you've made your final statement, stop talking. Don't qualify. Don't add, just think about it, or let me know. Make your close, then be silent. Based on everything I've presented, I believe the right decision is clear. I need your approval to proceed. Stop talking. Wait for their response. That silence puts the ball in their court. It forces a decision. And decisions are what closing arguments are designed to produce. What not to do. Don't introduce new information in your close. If it was important, it should have been in the body of your argument. New information in the closing makes you seem disorganized. Don't apologize or hedge. I know this might not be perfect, but undermines everything you've built. Close with confidence or don't close at all. Don't ramble. Your closing should be tight, 2 minutes maximum in most conversations. Get in, make your point, get out. Don't end with any questions. That invites objections after you've built momentum. If questions are appropriate, they come before the close, not after. The action-oriented language. Your closing should use active, decisive language. Not, I think we should consider maybe. But, I'm recommending we move forward with. Not, it might be good if. But the next step is. Passive language signals uncertainty. Active language signals leadership. The emotional peak. While most of your argument should be logical and evidence-based, your closing can appeal to emotion carefully. This isn't just about quarterly numbers. It's about building something we can be proud of. It's about looking back a year from now and knowing we made the hard choice, the right choice, when it mattered most. Emotion in the close works because people make decisions emotionally and justify them logically. Your evidence gave them the logical justification. Your emotional appeal in the close gives them permission to feel good about saying yes. The binary choice. Sometimes the most effective close presents two clear options and makes one obviously better. We have two paths. Path 1. We continue with the current system, accept 15% annual client churn, and hope things improve. Path 2. We invest in this solution, reduce churn to industry standard of 5%, and protect $3 million in annual revenue. I'm recommending Path 2. Who's with me? You've made the choice simple and obvious. Practice your close. Here's what separates professionals from amateurs. Professionals practice their closing. Lawyers rehearse closing arguments dozens of times before trial. They know exactly what they're going to say and how they're going to say it. You should do the same before any important conversation. Write out your closing. Say it out loud. Refine it. Know it so well that even if the conversation goes off script, you can deliver a powerful close from memory. The ultimate truth. Your closing is your legacy from the conversation. It's what people take with them when they walk away. A weak close makes everything before it forgettable. A strong close makes everything before it inevitable. In our final chapter, we're going to bring everything together, every technique, every strategy, every principle, and show you how to synthesize these skills into a complete system for winning any argument. Remember, you can have the best case in the world, but if you don't close powerfully, you haven't made your case at all. Chapter 10, Mastery, bringing it all together and your path forward. You've reached the final chapter. And if you've been paying attention, you now possess something most people will never have, a complete system for arguing like a lawyer without ever stepping foot in a courtroom. But here's the critical question. What are you going to do with this knowledge? Because information without implementation is just entertainment. And you didn't listen to this audiobook to be entertained. You listened because you're tired of losing arguments you should win. You're tired of watching less qualified people get promoted because they know how to make their case. You're tired of being right but unable to prove it in a way that matters. That ends today, but only if you commit to mastery. The complete system, a rapid review. Let's bring it all together. Here's the framework you now own. First, you control the frame. Before anyone speaks, you've already decided how this conversation will be defined. You deliver your opening statement, clear, concise, confident. You set the terms. You establish the narrative. You make the first move, and first moves win arguments. Second, you build your case with evidence. You don't make claims, you prove them. Documentary evidence. Testimonial evidence. Physical evidence. You show up with receipts, with data, with facts that can't be disputed. You're specific. You're precise. And precision equals credibility. Third, you ask questions that control the conversation. You cross-examine without aggression. You use the funnel technique, broad to narrow. You get people to say yes repeatedly until the final yes is inevitable. You never ask questions you don't know the answers to. You let their own words build your case. Fourth, you handle objections by turning them into opportunities. You acknowledge, isolate, and redirect. You use the yes and technique. You inoculate by addressing weaknesses before others can weaponize them. You don't fear objections. You welcome them because you've prepared for them. Fifth, you maintain emotional control. You pause before responding. You stay calm when others escalate. You use silence as a weapon. You control your body because your body controls your mind. You're the steady force in the room, and steady wins trust. Sixth, you deploy the Socratic Method. You don't tell people they're wrong. You ask questions that make them discover it themselves. You help them understand. You guide them to the truth. And when they arrive at your conclusion on their own, they defend it like it was their idea all along. Seventh, you reframe the narrative. You control the language. You choose the context. You decide whether something is a cost or an investment, a problem or an opportunity, a setback or a learning experience. You understand that reality is negotiable, not the facts, but the meaning. Eighth, you wield silence strategically. You know when to stop talking. You let silence create pressure. You pause for emphasis. You wait while others squirm. You understand that the person who can sit comfortably in silence controls the room. Ninth, you close with power. You summarize your strongest points. You explain the significance. You issue a clear call to action. You don't leave it vague. You don't hope they'll figure it out. You tell them exactly what you want them to do, and you make it easy to say yes. This is your system. This is your blueprint. This is how you argue like a lawyer. The implementation challenge. Here's where most people fail. They consume information and do nothing with it. They listen, they nod, they agree, and then they go back to arguing the same ineffective way they always have. Don't be that person. Starting today, commit to implementing one technique per week. Not all of them at once. That's overwhelming. One per week. Week 1, practice opening statements. Before every important conversation, decide your frame and deliver it clearly. Week 2, focus on evidence. Don't make claims without backing them up. Week 3, master the art of questions. Turn 3 statements you'd normally make into questions. Week 4, work on objection handling. When someone challenges you, acknowledge, isolate, redirect. Week 5, emotional control. Practice the 3-second pause before responding. Week 6, Socratic Method. Ask questions that lead people to your conclusion. Week 7, reframing. Take 3 negative situations and practice reframing them positively. Week 8, strategic silence. Practice being comfortable with pauses. Week 9, closing arguments. End conversations with summary, significance, and call to action. By week 9, these techniques won't be techniques anymore. They'll be instincts. They'll be who you are, the ethical foundation. Before we close, let's address something critical. These tools are powerful, and power can be used for good or manipulated for harm. Use these skills to advocate for yourself and others. Use them to advance ideas you genuinely believe in. Use them to create value, solve problems, and make things better. Don't use them to deceive. Don't use them to bully. Don't use them to win arguments that shouldn't be won. As attorney and Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall once said, "In recognizing the humanity of our fellow beings, we pay ourselves the highest tribute. The point of arguing effectively isn't to dominate others. It's to ensure truth, fairness, and merit prevail." Lawyers have rules of professional conduct. You should too. Be honest with your evidence. Be fair in your framing. Be respectful even when others aren't. Win with integrity, and your wins will compound because people will trust you. The mindset shift. Everything you've learned in this audiobook requires a fundamental mindset shift. You have to stop seeing arguments as conflicts to avoid and start seeing them as opportunities to influence. Arguments aren't personal attacks. They're the collision of different perspectives. And the person who can navigate that collision most skillfully determines the outcome. This means getting comfortable with disagreement. It means not taking challenges personally. It means understanding that objections aren't rejection, they're engagement. The best lawyers don't avoid tough conversations. They seek them out because tough conversations are where the important decisions get made. Adopt that mindset, and you'll start showing up differently in every professional and personal interaction. Your competitive advantage. Here's something most people don't realize. Very few people know how to argue effectively. Most people wing it. They react emotionally. They make statements instead of asking questions. They get defensive instead of strategic. Which means if you implement even half of what you've learned here, you'll have a massive competitive advantage. In negotiations, in meetings, in performance reviews, in conflict resolution, in sales, in leadership. While others are stumbling through arguments hoping for the best, you'll have a system. You'll have a framework. You'll have techniques that have been refined over centuries of legal practice. That's not a small edge. That's transformative. The practice requirement. You can't learn to argue like a lawyer by listening once. You have to practice. You have to implement. You have to fail, adjust, and improve. Start small. Practice these techniques in low-stakes conversations first. The barista gets your order wrong? Practice reframing. A friend makes a questionable claim? Practice the Socratic Method. A coworker pushes back on your idea? Practice objection handling. Treat every conversation as a training ground. Because it is. The lawyers who dominate courtrooms didn't learn their skills in trial. They learned them through thousands of hours of practice, preparation, and deliberate application. You're building the same skill set. Give yourself permission to be imperfect at first. What matters is that you're building the muscle. The momentum principle. Here's what's going to happen. The first time you use these techniques effectively, something will click. You'll win an argument you would have lost before. You'll get a yes where you expected a no. You'll walk away from a conversation thinking, that actually worked. That's momentum. And momentum builds on itself. The second time will be easier. The third time easier still. Within months, people will start perceiving you differently. She always knows what to say. He's incredibly persuasive. They never seem flustered. That's not charisma. That's not natural talent. That's systematic application of proven techniques. And now you have those techniques. The final close. So here we are. The closing argument of this audiobook. You came here looking for an edge. You now have an entire arsenal. You came here frustrated by lost arguments and missed opportunities. You now have the framework to win both. You came here as someone who knew they were right but couldn't always prove it. You're leaving as someone who can make any case, handle any objection, and close any argument. The question is, what will you do with this power? Will you listen and forget? Or will you implement and transform? Will you go back to arguing the way you always have? Or will you start arguing like a lawyer, strategic, prepared, and consistently effective? The choice is yours. But if you're serious about mastering these skills, here's your call to action. First, subscribe to Mindset Audiobooks right now if you haven't already. This is where you'll continue developing the psychological edge in every area of your life. Second, pick one technique from this audiobook and use it in a conversation today. Not tomorrow. Today. Implementation starts now. Third, share this audiobook with someone who needs these skills. The person struggling to advocate for themselves. The person who's brilliant but can't communicate their value. The person who deserves better but doesn't know how to argue for it. You now possess knowledge that most people will never encounter. Every lawyer spends 3 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars learning these techniques. You got them in under 2 hours. That's not luck. That's you being intentional about growth. That's you refusing to accept mediocrity in your communication. That's you choosing mastery. And mastery isn't a destination, it's a practice. You'll use these techniques for the rest of your life. In boardrooms and living rooms. In negotiations and disagreements. In moments that matter and moments that seem trivial. Every single one is an opportunity to practice arguing like a lawyer. As the legendary trial attorney Jerry Spence wrote, "I would rather have a mind opened by wonder than one closed by belief." You've opened your mind to new possibilities today. Now it's time to put them into practice. This is Mindset Audiobooks. This has been How to Argue Like a Lawyer Without Going to Court. And you are now equipped to win every argument that matters. Go out there and make your case. The world is waiting to hear it.